Good afternoon, everyone. And without wanting to deny Father Tony his duties in his parish, I will be very brief. Today we are going to hear for Session 2, Rule of Law, a paper from Father Tony Percy, who's Vicar General of the Archdiocese of Canberra and Goulburn, a position he's held since 2014. But he's also been a leading figure most recently in a campaign against the ACT government over the compulsory acquisition of Calvary Public Hospital, something that former Prime Minister John Howard said was the greatest assault on private ownership that he has ever seen. So, Father Tony, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. It's not a paper, I'm just going to talk. I think most of you would know something about the situation. Just that COVID word, though, with Alan, with that wonderful speech there. Do you remember the Ioannis Leak cartoon, March 2020 at Easter in the Australian? And Jesus is there, looks like Jesus, and he's trying to roll the stone back and get out. And there's a copper in the car pointing at him, said, "Don't you even think about it." So you've got to try and remember these things with some sort of humour. So, and he did one for, Ioannis did a cartoon for this particular case. Let me give you the history. So 1971, that's when the federal government started conversations with the Little Company of Mary to bring a hospital to Canberra. The idea was to try and draw public servants out of Melbourne and Sydney, the nation's capital, which was developing rapidly. By 1979, they had given them a 120-year lease, so the land, the buildings they built, and the medical agreement to conduct a second public hospital. They've got a private hospital close by. That has not been gobbled up, but the public hospital has. So they came out in May of this year, the government, the ACT Greens Labor government, that's the best way to describe it. They came out with this proposal, very clearly in sort of concrete, late May, that by the 3rd of July they were going to do a compulsory acquisition of Calvary Hospital. So they said we won't be having, we'll suspend the standing orders, we won't be having the normal procedures in the Assembly, the Parliament there. Now that was normally 2 months, and that itself was put in by the Greens, so they said, right, we won't have that discussion at all, no inquiries, no reports, no questions, nothing, no consultation whatsoever. And secondly, we will do the compulsory acquisition not according to our 1994 ACT Land Acquisition Act, which is where you do the compulsory acquisition. No, we'll just put through this bill called the Infrastructure Enabling Act 2023, and by the 3rd of July, which was basically a month, things are going to happen. So they took it over. So the two issues here, to my mind, in my humble opinion, which if you know me is not very humble and not much of an opinion, but my thoughts are that in terms of the rule of law, what we're dealing with here is property rights, the actual legitimate property rights of an institution, in this case a medical institution. Next time it'll be an educational institution. Don't you worry about that unless we fight as hard as we can. So that's the sort of the real issue there, I think. And then secondly, you've got the issue of religious freedom. Now, we have got an inquiry which is coming up in the Senate, which is the 4th of September. And we've got a hearing, it's been extended. And they voted 31 to 30 to give us the inquiry. And then after that has happened, we will then conduct a more political campaign. So the idea is going to be clearly to do this, is to write to every single politician, federally, state, in the territories, and ask and say to them, right, in your particular electorate, there are these institutions, private institutions, whatever they are, whether they're religious or not. Can you now give us a guarantee that all of these institutions in your electorate are safe from the sort of behaviour that happened in Canberra by the ACT government against Calvary? Because as I just mentioned a minute ago, if you can do it with a medical institution of some renown that's been delivering very fine medical services for a long period of time, you can do it with anyone. And the next thing will be the schools, So the Law Reform Commission, it's been given the mandate to go ahead and draw up this idea, well, who can the schools, religious schools, employ? You know, what are the bounds, what are going to be the sort of parameters? So this is going to be another problem. So this won't stop here. So my view is, my humble opinion, my view is that we really have to fight as hard as we can. So to my complete surprise, we had over 50,000 people sign the petition. So just to put that in perspective, when we started a petition in Canberra because the government, when COVID was finishing, when that was happening, the government wouldn't let us gather to celebrate Mass or other faiths as well. You could go shopping, but you couldn't had 10 people or 20 people in a 500-metre square church. It was incredible. So we got 1,000 signatures there, and then they came to the party and said, right, you can have what you want. But this was 50,000. 50,000 signatures. People of faith, no faith, they could see the problem. So the property rights are very, very important. A free and fair nation that's one of the freedoms. John mentioned it last night, John Anderson. This is one of the really important freedoms. So if they can do this to Calvary, they can do it to anyone. So we've got to fight as hard as we can. The second issue then is religious freedom. So what happened? They did an analysis in Canberra. They did a big sort of research into how abortion was being delivered. Now, it's not really about abortion. Some people think it is, but let me give you the background of this. So the ACT government said, right, how is abortion being provided for in Canberra? And they provided this report April 2023, and this is April the 10th. So in that, right at the beginning, they say, look, neither the main public hospital in Canberra, neither Calvary Public Hospital, none of those hospitals do abortions, because all the abortions are done in medical centres, day centres around the city. And one of the reasons for this, and you should know this, is because the doctors do not like doing it, and neither do the nurses. It's a very specific procedure. That's one of the reasons for it. So right at the beginning of that report, it says, it admits that. But then at the back end of the report, it says, oh, well, we know that Calvary is offering these medical services with too much of a religious overtone. When I was interviewed by Ray Hadley was sort of gasping for breath because he gave all these examples of how he himself had been in religious hospitals, had received the best care and was not having religion sort of shoved down his throat. He just went through a whole plethora. You can sort of line it up on YouTube now and listen to it. So I think he was the person who most understood the issue because he was quite critical of the church with the whole sexual abuse crisis, and fair enough. But he was very clear this was an issue not just about Catholicism, it was an issue about religious freedom. So we've just had that excellent lecture there. When you go to the Constitution, just to remind you, there's that section 116 which should live in everyone's heart here and every Australian citizen, and young people should be informed and formed on this particular section. Section 116 says there's to be no official religion. It's brilliant. No official religion, no compulsion in religion, no restriction on religion, no religious discrimination. That's what the section says. I've paraphrased it, but that's what it says. It's brilliant. And what it's doing is protecting a fundamental right to search for the meaning of life, whether you happen to be religious or not. And again, Ray Hadley understood this really, really clearly. So the most foundational right in life, of course, is the right to life. The second most important right is the right to religious liberty. That is that you're given the freedom to be able to search for and then adhere to what you think is the meaning of life, whether you happen to be religious or not. So I'm a Catholic priest, and some of you here have different faiths, and perhaps there's people here with no faith. We've got to have that basic respect for people's positions, which this particular case showed clearly not. What's intriguing is the founders of the country who wrote this section were not religious. Most of them were not religious at all. Some were deists, some might have been Christians, but most of them were not. But they understood if you want a free and fair country, you've got to have this in your constitution. As a matter of fact, Patrick McMahon Glynn, an institute in ACU, is named after him. He was very influential, very highly regarded and very influential in helping the founders see why this has got to be part of the Australian Constitution. So I'll stop there. It was mystifying to me, and I'll take questions if you like. was mystifying to me as to why the Prime Minister came out in support of this. I could not imagine Bob Hawke or Paul Keating or John Curtin or Ben Chifley doing something like that. I mean, I just could not imagine them, having read extensively on their life. So every moment I get whenever I speak on this, I bash up the Prime Minister of the country, because I think it was a disgraceful act that he came out supporting that sort of behaviour. In other words, supporting Mr Barr and his Labor mates and Green mates, rather than supporting who he was elected to support, which is the people of Australia. So, having revved you up a bit, I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Tony. I believe there are quite a few questions, so the people with the microphones could maybe go over there and then over there. Tony, while we're just getting the microphone over there, in the media over the last week, some activists in Brisbane have now set their sights on the Mater Hospital there for exactly the same reasons. It's the public hospital run by Catholic Healthcare, and one of the doctors was quoted in the media as saying, "It's an alien concept to me to have religion involved in healthcare." And I found that quite an extraordinary quote, when surely a hospital environment where you're faced with questions of mortality, of life and death, that is where religion plays a role. Not for everyone, of course, yes. But anyway, that's what you're dealing with. So this gentleman over here, if you just say your name and affiliation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Ben Davies. My affiliation is I am a regular patient of the Calvary Hospital in Canberra. And I highly recommend the beautiful sandwiches that they serve you when you wake up from a general anaesthetic. Before I ask the question, can I start with a quote to put the question in context? Can I quote from the website of the ACT Human Rights Commission, which says, "Human rights are universal and enjoyed by everyone in the ACT, regardless of gender, religious belief, nationality, race, or any other point of difference. The ACT was the first jurisdiction in Australia to enact a Human Rights Act. The Act provides an explicit statutory basis for respecting, protecting and promoting fundamental human rights. Rights protected include freedom of thought, conscious and religious belief." A link on the ACT Human Rights Commissioner's website also says that the Commissioner will intervene in matters that raise important questions of human rights. So my question, Father, perhaps somewhat naively is, what, if any, was the role of the ACT Human Rights Commissioner in this affair?
Sounds like a Dixon, Tony.
This will be the shortest answer I've ever given to a question. Nothing. That's the problem. By the way, that point about the Mater, I made this exact point about the Mater up in Brisbane, and then what's the Mercy down in... Oh, Mercy's here, isn't it? I'm in Victoria. I'm in Denistan as I stand. People should read Rodney Stark's The Rise of Christianity. They should read that. That looks at why Christianity rose quickly. One of the reasons given is they were really good in the ancient plagues at loving each other and actually caring for each other, so they had far greater survival rates after the plagues. And that's why a lot of the other unbelievers went out the back door to God and they stayed on earth. And so they, as a proportion of the population, they were much larger. And that's because of the motivation of the dignity of the human person that we do hospitals and do healthcare. That's the motivation. And we've been very good at it. We've been doing it since Christ walked the earth. And it's one of the reasons why Christianity rose very quickly in those early years.
It's Michael Sutherland from Western Australia. What were you compensated? What was the Catholic Church compensated for the hospital, and was that compensation reasonable compensation? Because I've heard that the price that was paid was very good compensation. Not saying that the principle was right, but can you inform us what happened with the compensation?
Yeah, well, we don't know. They're negotiating it now, and it's in the regulations, not the Act itself. And they've got a standing right to go back to the Supreme Court, who said no to the appeal. They've got a standing right to go back if they're not happy with the compensation. So that's the story. Calvary, they're building a lot of private hospitals now. They've been asked to build a second hospital in Adelaide, and then the Tasmanians are after another one. They built a 342-bed hospital down in South Australia for $350 million, and the current ACT government says they're going to build a 500-bed hospital for $1 billion. You watch, it'll be $3 billion. Because as soon as they came out with this, the head of the CFMEU down there straight away said, yep, get the bulldozers out and go right through it now. It was on the same day. The same day. Incredible.
Oh, yes, David.
You need a mic, I think, mate, because they're going to record it. We're giving someone some exercise. Go, go, go.
David Davis, Victorian State MP and former Health Minister. But this is very important that you've brought this issue to the fore, not only in terms of religious freedom, but in our health system, we actually need diversity, we need innovation, and the Mercy Hospital here is a great innovator. We need a system that has competition in it as well. And the religious sector provides a very important balance, competition and diversity, while respecting, as Georgina alluded to, that spirituality that's so important, a recognition about end-of-life issues and other issues across our sector. So I see this as part of an assault on our health sector and the diversity, competition and innovation in the sector. You might want to comment.
Well, I think this is a very, very important point. Now, John Howard, because the esteemed Prime Minister of the country, it's his view, it's only his view, but when I first heard this, I thought that's a bit over the top. But having been involved in this issue now, I realise the truth of it. He maintains that Menzies' greatest achievement was the funding of independent schools, which of course included the Catholic schools. So that came out of the Goulburn school strike, as you know. There was and the toilet block's still there, 1962. We marched all the kids out of the Catholic schools into the state schools, and they couldn't cope. So Menzies said, right, let's give them funding. Now, as I got involved with this issue, I began to realise the importance of that, because what you've got three levels of society. You've got government, you've got the individual, and in the middle you've got all these intermediary institutions which actually carry out the principle of subsidiarity. It's a very important social principle. And so by funding them, what that has given Australia is a tremendous diversity of institutions, private and also public, in those intermediary institutions, particularly in education and in health. And that is so important. Otherwise, once that's taken away, what have you got left? You just got the government doing everything. And what are you at then? Well, you're at socialism then. So actually, I think what Howard has observed is profoundly true, and I think what you've just said then is really, really true. And the only time they should be shut down is if they're really incompetent, if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, if they're producing kids that can't read and can't add up out of schools, or they're producing people that are not being healed in hospitals. Okay, shut them down. But otherwise, if your motivations are because the service is too religiously motivated, it's crazy. So I think this is really worth our thought, and it's certainly worth the thought of all the younger ones here. I must say I was delighted when I came in last night. Delighted. I was delighted to be asked wherever Xavier's gone, and delighted when I just saw all these young people here. I thought, my God, and where are you, Hugh? Hugh's over there. I saw Hugh this morning, Hugh Morgan, and I just... and Hugh and all the founders, they must be delighted to see so many young people here. But this is such an important issue for young people, I think, to say, right, the principles of the social sphere are the dignity of the human person, the importance of the common good, which is all those conditions which help a human person flourish, the principle of subsidiarity and the principle of solidarity. Now, it comes out of Catholic social teaching, but anyone can grasp hold of it. And once we start giving way on one of these areas, then the whole thing starts collapsing really quickly. So we've got a fight on our hands. I must say I've really enjoyed the fight. It's been really, really fun. And my father, who's gone to God, he was a lawyer, and then he got out of that, and then he got into the Labor Party, and then he got chased down a back lane because he opposed Doc Everett on something, and then he got into business and became a fully fledged Liberal Party member. So he would be very proud, I think. We always talk politics and the social stuff at home, but it's just a great moment, I think, because what I'm seeing in Australia today is there is a lot of difficulties, but there's underneath it, there's a lot of young people who are thinking very, very seriously about what is happening in this country. And if I had time, I could tell you about a funeral I had last week of an incredibly dysfunctional family and these grandkids, how they are doing something different than the previous generation. So don't doubt that renewal is underway, but I think this is a fantastic issue, this particular issue. I've got plenty of time. I've got to get back on a plane at 3, so I'm not in a hurry.
And then the lady behind you.
And the wedding's tomorrow, it's not this afternoon. So.
Oh, scrap lunch.
As far as I know, but if it's today, I'm in trouble.
Father, thanks for telling us this dreadful story. The road to Calvary, indeed. I remember a year ago in Brighton Les Sands at this conference last year, I prefaced a question with comments about executive overreach, and I see that as the biggest problem in the political system in Australia. We had the Fauci, Ghebreyesus, Bill Gates virus, of course. We're in the city of governments that never take responsibility for anything, never acknowledge criminality or corruption or mere failure. Calvary seems to be all of a piece with the broader trends in Australia, notwithstanding what you said about the green shoots among our young people. And what we're talking about is an abrogation of acknowledgement of government failure or government evil. Governments now simply move on, never say sorry, never acknowledge that they have done grievous harm, and no one seems to call them out on it anymore. People like yourself do call them out, but the calling out of government evil doesn't seem to matter to the governments anymore. So we've got governments that are going to sell the economy down the drain with renewables. We've got so many examples. I'd like your comment on whether you might see the road to Calvary as an example of this new dreadful phenomenon.
Yeah, look, I think that part of the problem, surely, and there's a lot of politicians in the room here, people with background politicians, part of the problem is the oppositions in these jurisdictions, right? There's the opposition down here seems to be very confused. In the ACT, it's absolutely muddled, and in Queensland as well. So in New South Wales, we changed government recently. Now, what does MINS do? What does the Premier of New South Wales? They had a big stoush down there on the cemeteries. The Catholics run all the cemeteries. They're trying to take them off. So MINS comes in. He's got an uncle who's a Catholic priest. He said, look, the Catholics know what they're doing. They run them well. Why would we want to run them? A Labor guy. So what we've got to do in this country is get back to centre-left and centre-right. Because we've gone out on the extreme. So we've got to get young people involved in not only political life but also public life again. And that's why it's so good to have such a big room here of them. So it's not desperate. We're not going out quickly. But if we don't act now, we will not be going constructively forward to 2050 and 2100. And we've had largely very good government in the country. We've been able to change governments very well, if you take that as the pulse rate of the nation, unlike other countries. but it's slipping, but we can retrieve it. But we've got to have good oppositions, and I think that's part of the problem. And that they need competence and they need courage. Take the trans issue. Take the trans issue. Just see how stupid it is. I mean, I personally think it's a form of child abuse. If I'm ever going to be asked about it, I'm going to say, look, we've been through a Royal Commission on Child Abuse, and we're not going through another one, because that's what's happening with the young children. If someone's an adult, that's a different issue altogether. But you've got Tavistock closing down, you've got John Hopkins saying, look, enough is enough, this is crazy. So we've got to stand up. But look, just to take it away from the sexual area, you know, I identify as a pensioner. Well, hang on. That's what's happening. But I was born in 1960, so down I go to Centrelink and identify as a pensioner. And the bloke says, but hang on, mate, what age are you? Well, where's your birth certificate? I give him the birth certificate. He says, well, you were born in 1963. You're not a pensioner. There was a bloke that flew into the UK the other day from the US citizen. And he declared, I'm a UK citizen. And the government, this posh guy said, oh, wonderful, wonderful, you're identifying as a UK citizen, but you're not going to get a passport and you're not going to be part of the health system. Well, if it's so obviously stupid in that area, then it's got to be with sexuality. So have some courage. Let's have some courage and stand up and fight. If you're unafraid, no one can cancel you. That's it. That's it.
Thank you very much for your efforts. Nola McCallum, Royal Geographical Society, only of South Australia and a few other places. Are you able to comment on overseas precedents for this particular takeover? I'm thinking especially of the USA, which I know in so many ways is so influential with The Voice, etc. But yes, could you comment about the Calvary Hospital takeover in terms of any USA precedents where you've obviously got possibly the most vibrant private sector of all? Thank you.
Yeah, look, someone else might be able to do better than that in the health sector. I don't know a lot about the United States situation with this type of stuff. There was a thing about Nicaragua the other day, wasn't it, about taking over the Jesuit thing. But of course the problem in South American countries is the actual property rights themselves. They've got no real deeds there. And so where you don't have stable property rights, you can't produce wealth and you can't distribute it. The most natural mechanism we have for creating wealth and distributing it is private property. And that's why the current property prices on land and houses is such a threat to the middle class in this country. It has to be addressed on a bipartisan basis. We've got to get at why have we got such high property prices on the supply side and on the demand side? And what are all the things that are driving the supply and the demand problems? Because we can't possibly let this go on for too much longer. When Menzies was in power, it took you 3.8 years medium wage to buy a house. Now in Sydney it's about 17 or 18 years. So that means you'll never own a house. So, Melbourne's just slightly behind it. Canberra's just up there with them. All the capital cities, they're all in the worst 30 cities in the world for that measurement. We cannot tolerate that. So we've got to do something about it. But up until this point, our great property rights has actually led to this tremendously wealthy country and tremendously egalitarian country. And it's very important. The property rights issue, I think, is very, very important.
Andrew Reynolds, I'm not sure which affiliation to use, but I've been told to keep it brief. I'll just make one preliminary comment, which is that I note your criteria for the closing down of failing private schools would, if applied to the public system, perhaps result in them closing earlier. But coming from WA as I do, many of the comments that were used to justify the transfer of the ownership of the Calvary Hospital has been made about the St John of God, the two main St John of God hospitals that we have in WA. If you had known that this was in the offing, what steps would you have taken initially to try and forestall the process?
Yes, well, see, the government was in conversation with Calvary the year before about trying to get some of their land, and Calvary said, okay, we can negotiate about, you want to put another hospital there yourselves, okay, fine. But then it all just went quiet, and they just came out with the sort of time frame in May. So the Senate inquiry will help us. We'll ask the what questions. You know, when did you start as a government to put this in play without any consultation? So, well, obviously you do things a lot differently, and it's not as if governments can't do compulsory acquisitions. They can, we know that, and they're doing them all the time for good reasons, and they've got to give good reasons, and there's got to be just reasons, which includes not just the price, but also the process. That's important, and that's what hasn't happened in this case, big time. So you obviously you do it very differently, and you've got to assume that the parties are of goodwill. Now the government wasn't. The government said to Calvary repeatedly, it doesn't matter what you do in the courts, we're going to keep driving this legislation back. They said it. And they manoeuvred and went all over the place. So they've been in there 23 years. I mean, the latest thing by the health minister down there in Canberra, it's just quite disgraceful, I think. That she revealed to everyone at the national conference how they got through all this illicit drug stuff. Now, I said to my assistant priest, their family's got a lot of drug issues, this should be unrecorded, and he's never met his father, all this sort of stuff, and he's a priest, he's a convert to the faith, he became a priest, a great young bloke, fantastic young priest. And he said, you know, my sister's just got out of jail with drugs. And she said, why would you do that? She's got no teeth. Why would you legalise drugs? She's got no teeth. So this complete lack of sympathy for what is actually happening in the polis with regards to drugs. They're completely out of touch. So we've got to fight, and that's what we're going to do. Fight as hard as we can.
We have 5 more minutes for questions. I think we've got a question. Andrew, do you still... No, you don't have the mic. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. My name's Neil Ferris. I'm a lawyer, an ex-Liberal Party candidate, ex-member of the Liberal Party. That says it all. Isn't what happened to Calvary, and indeed what happened recently with the fiasco with Higginson and Learman, just the behaviour of a completely corrupt, rotten borough that has delusions of grandeur? It believes it's a government and it has a territory that it governs. Aren't they just simply illustrations of the behaviour of people who are basically out of control and out of accountability? And supplementary question, whose bright idea was it to give the ACT self-government?
That was done under Bob Hawke, under the Hawke government. Yeah, well, I mean, I think you've answered your own question, really. They are out of control, but again, the opposition is very weak there, and it has been for some time. And we've got to try and restore confidence in political and public life. It's very important. But it can happen very quickly. Things can change. It only takes a few people to change things. There's no doubt in my mind. Like, for instance, I personally think that one of the best things that could happen this summer to really make people think clearly about what's happening with energy in the country is we have a very hot summer. A thumping summer where the power goes off. To illustrate to everyone the lies that are being told about what energy we need in this country. Now, Bob Hawke said we need nuclear energy back in 1983. He was on with Margaret Throsby on ABC Classic FM. She was aghast. He said, oh, come on, Margaret, get with it. You know, Bob's typical style. But he said it 40 years ago. The argument is not hard. If you're not going to have coal or there's other things, then you've got to say, well, what's the alternative? Because you've got to have a base load. You cannot run a modern economy on what they're talking about. I mean, the Germans had the nuclear power, and they spent $2 to $3 trillion on wind because solar doesn't work in the country. And last summer, what happened? They had a wind drought. So what did they do? I had a wedding in the south coast of New South Wales this year, and the wedding party sounds, look at this fella there, I had a chat with him. What do you do? Oh, I'm an engineer, he said, engineer, building hospitals, but now I'm building data centres. I said, oh yes, data centres. Gee, they'd use a bit of power. He said, listen, Father, they use more power than a city. I said, where's that coming from? He said, guess where? Turn on. They get all these requests, the back-end requests. So there's so much untruth being told. So we need something like that to wake people up to say, and then when that happens, people start to say, right, let's take a different journey, and that's what'll happen, yeah, in my view.
Tony, I think we've hit one. Oh, you want? Sorry.
I was just going to be quick.
Sorry, Jim.
Firstly,
Very, very quick, because you're standing between us and lunch.
okay. Well, it's
By the way, nice article this morning in the Australian. I suppose everyone in the room's read it. Or?
I don't know if they have. I still have a job, but maybe not Monday. I personally noticed how great it is to have a parish priest whose views are so in keeping with the Peronist Pope. So that's fantastic. So I want to push back on one little thing. I agree, but there's lots of optimism at the national level, and we have a great constitution. But one of the things we got wrong in copying so much from the Americans was to carve out a little jurisdiction from the states and make it be its sort of own little capital city. In Washington, D.C., 95% of people vote Democrat. No Republican gets a fair trial. So your optimism for the ACT, I think, to be nice, is sort of diluted. It's a jurisdiction of public servants, and the chances that they are ever going to sort of reform seem to me to be sort of rhyme with the fifth Roman emperor.
Yeah, no, I'm not positive about the ACT. In fact, I live outside the ACT. I breathe the fresh air of New South Wales, along with your good friend there, Paul Linwell. But no, it's a problem because they're all moneyed up with the job, of course. Yeah. But for the rest of the country, yeah. And I think what you're going to start to see is migration out of the place. You start to see people migrate, and that's what's happening now. They're migrating out of Canberra to a place like Jerrabomba and Googong. Googong's this new development over near the dam, and it's about 5 minutes from Queanbeyan, which is a classic New South Wales country town. It's a great place. So no, I agree. You don't have to kick back on that one. Yeah. All right. Is it we having wine for lunch or something, or not?
I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Father Tony for that presentation today and bringing to our awareness quite a concerning issue, not just the issue in the ACT, but the broader issue on the attack on religious institutions. And Tony, we were going to give you a little book a plug, weren't we? The Australia, What Went Right and What Went Wrong, down here on the table. And I understand it's a distillation of David Kemp's 5 magnificent volumes on Australian liberalism, which I commend to you all as well. So thank you so much, Tony. Thank you.